from the beautiful Mount Wuyi in southern China. As always, you can follow me on Facebook and Twitter using the handle Luxin in Beijing. On behalf of the whole team, thank you for watching. You've got the point.
Live from London, this is The World Today.
Hello, I'm Robin Dwyer. Welcome to the programme. Our top stories. 4 men appear in court charged over the attack on a Moscow concert hall that killed at least 137 people. Dozens killed in the latest Israeli airstrikes on Gaza as the UN Security Council prepares to vote on a new resolution calling for an immediate ceasefire. Celebrations in Dakar as Senegal's opposition candidate takes an early lead in the delayed presidential election. And a growing housing crisis for Portugal, with many young people finding themselves priced out of the market. 4 men have been charged over the attack on a Moscow concert hall that left at least 137 people dead. The suspects, who Russian media say are Tajik nationals, appeared in court in Moscow and had apparently been badly beaten. They were remanded in custody on terrorism charges. The Islamic State group said its members carried out Friday's attack, claims backed by US and French intelligence. France has now raised its terror alert to the highest level after the attack. The Kremlin says it believes that Ukraine was involved. Well, let's talk now to our correspondent, Dasha Chernyshova, who's in Moscow. So, Dasha, what happened when these men appeared in court?
Well, the 4 men have been previously detained in the Bryansk region as they were trying to escape to Ukraine, according to the Russian authorities, have indeed appeared in court. That happened late Sunday night. They were, according to the pictures that we have received, badly beaten. Their faces swollen. One of them has appeared in court with the medical robe, accompanied by the doctors. They all were they were all charged with terrorism. At least 2 of them have pleaded guilty. They will remain in the pre-trial detention until the 22nd of May. This is when the court hearing and the trial is expected to take place. We understand that they all faced lifetime in prison. Obviously, there has been a lot of discussion with regards to the investigation, but the Kremlin did not provide any comments, saying that it is the very sensitive information. Neither did the Kremlin comment on the state and the treatment of the suspects. We also understand from the Russian officials that the investigation is ongoing without the help of the Western intelligence, with the Russian officials saying that the Russian intelligence is doing everything possible to defend Russia against the threats and challenges that the country is facing.
And Dasha, the Kremlin continuing to claim that Ukraine was involved in this attack.
Well, to the moment, the Kremlin did not provide more comments apart from what we know. They have said, however, that no coherent version of the investigators have been provided so far. So the Russian president has said that Ukraine could be involved because of the opening that was allegedly prepared to the for these 4 men in the border with Ukraine. However, many experts say that if there is an opening prepared on the Ukrainian side, there has to be an opening prepared on the Russian side as well. So there are many questions with regard to that, but the Russian authorities have not publicly made any reference to the Islamic State banned in Russia. At the same time, we are hearing the Russian authorities and the Kremlin itself saying that Russia understands the necessity of international cooperation when it comes to the international fight against terrorism, saying that at the moment, however, with the increasingly escalated international situation in terms of the geopolitics, it is very hard to to continue this cooperation. But nevertheless, it is a non-stop process. So from the Russian side, we haven't had any reference to the Islamic State, even though the U.S. Embassy has been warning Russia of a possible terrorist attack in the Russian capital. And also we have heard from the U.S. officials saying that the videos released by the Islamic State following this attack are authentic.
Dasha, thank you very much. Our correspondent Dasha Chernysheva in Moscow. The UN Security Council is due to vote on a new draft resolution to demand an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. This comes after Russia and China vetoed an earlier text proposed by the United States on Friday. Several resolutions have been vetoed at the Council in previous months because of disagreements between the 5 permanent members. More than 32,000 Palestinians have been killed during the conflict, which began in October when Hamas militants launched attacks in southern Israel, killing 1,200 people. UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres says it's absolutely fundamental to keep people in Gaza alive, and the international community must insist on a ceasefire.
See a growing consensus emerging international community to tell the Israelis that the ceasefire is needed. And I also see a growing consensus. I heard it in the US, I heard it from the European Union, not to mention, of course, the Muslim world, a growing consensus to tell clearly to the Israelis that any ground invasion of Rafah could mean a catastrophic humanitarian disaster.
Well, let's go now to the home of the United Nations, New York, and talk to our correspondent there, John Terrett. So, John, what's happening now?
Yes. Yeah. There's been a delay, Robin, is the answer. I'm in the newsroom, as you can see, and down on the chamber floor, I think you could probably see live pictures coming in now of members of the Security Council standing round and waiting. And this is meeting number 9,586 of the Security Council. The official title is The Situation in the Middle East, including the Palestinian Question. The meeting was due to get underway at 10 a.m. local time. That's 5 or 6 or 7 minutes ago, but it still hasn't properly got underway. And my understanding is, once again, the Council is deadlocked over the issue of words. Now, this resolution has been drafted by the 10 non-permanent members. It's the one I talked about on Friday. And it does call for an immediate ceasefire until the end of the Muslim holy month of Ramadan. But then it goes on to demand a permanent ceasefire. And my understanding is that some members, mainly the United States, that's my understanding, not happy about the word permanent and seeking to move it to the word lasting. Remember, I told you on Friday when we were doing this then that when you're writing international law, it comes down to individual words and their meanings. Now, this resolution also calls for hostages to be released, calls for aid to go into Gaza, particularly food. And the 22 Arab nations, we call them the 22 here because there are 22 Arab nations in the world, and collectively they're known as the 22. And the 22 have urged adoption of this particular agenda. But as you can see, the meeting is still there. What will be happening at the moment is that senior diplomats will be in a side room. You see that door there with the exit sign? Through there is where they meet to dot the I's and cross the T's. And that's what's going on at the moment. And of course, this meeting, Robin, as you well know, comes just a handful of days, because it was only on Friday that the US sponsored a resolution, but that was vetoed by Russia, China, and another country as well. So at the moment, I can't tell you when this meeting is going to get underway, but there is an ongoing delay, Robin.
Well, Jonah, as you talk to us, as you watch those live pictures, we are also looking at those live pictures on our screens, and that meeting, as you say, clearly not fully properly in session yet. There has been immense international pressure, though, hasn't there, after several draft texts failed to pass. How could this resolution be different?
Yeah. Well, I think one of the big things is that Russia and China are on board this time. If you remember, on Friday, 11 countries voted in favor of the one sponsored by America. 3 voted against, including China and Russia and Algeria. And then Guyana, the South American country, voted to abstain. And once again, the problem on Friday was the use of words. Prior to calling for an immediate and sustainable ceasefire in the American resolution, there were the words "determined," "the imperative of." Now, it doesn't mean much to you and me, but when you're writing international law, it is, and those that voted against and abstained were unhappy about the use of that word, because what they said was that, okay, America is calling for a permanent and sustainable ceasefire, or immediate and sustainable ceasefire, but that they didn't really mean it, and that those words were the giveaway. So that's why it failed on Friday. Also, there is some concern, I think, about members supporting Hamas, or at least not criticizing Hamas. Linda Thomas Greenfield, who's the ambassador of the Biden administration to the United Nations, called all this petty and below the dignity of the body on Friday. So we'll have to see what happens today. You're probably still looking at those pictures, and they're still milling around while the senior diplomats are dotting the I's and crossing the T's in that room through that door. Finally, let me just remind you that Antonio Guterres, who is the Secretary General, was on the border of Gaza over the weekend talking about shocking extreme hunger, calling for massive supplies of aid to go in, starvation about to break out in the north of Gaza. For the record, Israel said today 103 aid trucks went in yesterday, Sunday. But you've got to remember, before all this broke out, it was more like 500 a day. So it's well down on where it was. And finally, Yoav Gallant is the Israeli defense minister. He's in Washington, D.C. now. He's talking about, when he meets the administration, the combined goals that Washington and Tel Aviv have. This is a huge rift has opened up between the two sides over the progress of this war. And he's also talking about Israel's quality edge, by which he means he's seeking money for America for weapons. This is Kamala Harris. The vice president said over the weekend it would be a mistake for Israel to invade or assault Rafah in the south of the Gaza Strip. Meanwhile, Israel insists it'll go ahead with that anyway, with or without support from Washington. Robin?
Well, John, we'll be back with you in the coming hours for an update on what's happening at the United Nations. But for now, John Terrett in New York, thank you very much. As the UN Security Council prepares to vote, ceasefire talks are continuing in Qatar. Let's talk to our correspondent, Sarah Coates, who is in Tel Aviv. So, Sarah, what's been happening at these talks?
Robin, just fairly briefly, I do have an update on this upcoming vote. The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, he is now threatening that if the United States doesn't actually veto this resolution, then he will stop this Israeli delegation from going to Washington to meet with these senior officials to discuss these alternatives to this operation in Rafah. That just came out a couple of minutes ago. But bringing it back now to these hostage talks, Israel has okayed this deal, which would see the release of some 40 Israeli captives for some 700 Palestinian prisoners, 100 of those who are serving life sentences for murder. This is now in the hands of Hamas. These mediators are waiting on a response from the group, but we do need to remember that this may take some time, given that all of this information discussed there in Doha now needs to be relayed back to the Gaza Strip and to the head of Hamas, Yahya Sinwar, who is believed to be hiding in an underground bunker. It's also important to point out that Israel has made a concession here, and this is to allow some of the people who've been forcibly pushed down south from the northern part of the Gaza Strip to return home. This would be women and children. There would be some 2,000 people allowed to return to the north every day, but this would only be after these captives have been relieved. And just fairly briefly, this one major sticking point still remains, and that is the end to the war. Hamas wants a full comprehensive ceasefire, which, as we've heard time and time again, this is something that Israel will not allow.
So talks continuing, diplomatic efforts continuing, but meanwhile clashes are continuing at the Al-Shifa hospital in Gaza. Palestinian aid groups saying that Israel has besieged 2 more hospitals there.
Certainly, this operation is ongoing, Robin, at Al-Shifa Hospital. It's been ongoing now for a week since Israeli forces stormed that medical facility last Monday, saying that they have concrete evidence that Hamas is operating inside. We do have an operational update there. That is during this time that Israeli forces have killed some 100 Hamas operatives and arrested and detained some 500 others belonging to both Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad. Here's the IDF spokesperson, Daniel Hagari.
This operation isn't over yet. Right now, Hamas and Islamic Jihad terrorists are barricading themselves inside the Shifa hospital wards. Hamas is destroying the Shifa hospital. Hamas is firing from inside the Shifa emergency room and maternity ward, and throwing explosives devices from the Shifa burn ward. Terrorists hiding around the hospital are firing mortars at our forces, causing extensive damage to the hospital buildings.
And Robin, we do know that heavy fighting is continuing around both the Nasser Hospital and the Al-Amal Hospital in Khan Yunis, with the IDF saying that in the last day or so it has, quote, eliminated 20 terrorists in the vicinity of the Al-Amal Hospital. And according to the Palestinian Red Crescent, its medical teams were forced to evacuate from this hospital, remain outside for quite some time before being forced to go back in. Robin.
Sarah Coates in Tel Aviv, thank you very much. The United Nations Agency for Palestinian Refugees, UNRWA, says more people will die in northern Gaza after an Israeli ban on its aid deliveries there. Well, let's talk to our correspondent Akram Al-Sassari, who's in Rafah in Gaza. So Akram, the United Nations calling this blockade of aid to northern Gaza unacceptable.
Well, yes, the United Nations calls that blockade on the Gaza North as unacceptable. Other international figures from other international agencies are calling it illegal, unethical, catastrophic, disastrous. But the bottom line, the outcome is nothing, because people in the northern Gaza are still besieged. And even with the United States intervening and trying to alleviate some of the suffering of the people according to their sources, no one is able to change the policy that has been followed by the Israeli occupation towards Gaza, the North, for the North Gaza for such a very long time. And people continue to suffer, and they are likely to continue suffering because of the policy Israel is following when it comes to dealing with the convoys that are meant to be delivering the life-saving food. It's no longer a humanitarian or food aid. It's life-saving aid that is supposed to be delivered to people who are dying, to children who are dying in the Gaza North, elderly people who are dying in the Gaza North, and even patients who were dying and are still dying because of the lack to the very essential and life-saving food. So with all the attempts by the UN to change some of the misery that has been taking place in the Gaza North, the international community, the UN, and all the regional powers and international power seem to be failing to bring about anything tangible to help the people in Gaza North. The convoys that were organized to help those people were attacked by the Israeli occupation. A Shifa hospital was used, as was stated also by the Palestinians. The civil police was using a Shifa hospital for the sake of coordinating and facilitating the entry and the distribution of the food aid. And then we saw bloody days with the targeting of the commander of the police, with the targeting of the one who's in charge of the central investigative department in the police, and with the people who even were civilians, but still trying to facilitate a smooth entry of the food. So the situation is catastrophic, and I don't think, even with the strong wording of all the condemnations that have been made, no one is able to change the reality in the Gaza North, and people are likely to die, and more of them are likely to suffer because of that.
So Akram, give us an update on the latest situation in Gaza. What's been happening?
Well, the latest development when it comes to Gaza is that Hamas military wing, Izz-ad-Din al-Qassam, launched around 8 rockets towards Ashdod area. This is the first time this incident takes place in 2 months, particularly by Hamas military wing. Also in Beit Hanun area, there are some heavy fire taking place, an area that was announced or declared by the Israeli Occupation Army as area that has been cleaned and cleared from Hamas members. Also in the Gaza Central area, there are some heavy bombardments in Al-Mughraqa and Zahra area, and there are some reports about exchange of fire. In Khan Yunis, the operation continues, and you have mentioned in the report that they have been continuing blockading Al-Amal Hospital. They have blocked all different exits and entries of the hospital with the sand, and they are continuing to work in the vicinity of the hospital. Nasser Hospital is also somehow besieged, and there is some continuous bombardment in that area. So overall, all over the Gaza Strip, in all different parts, Gaza Central area, Gaza Northern area, Gaza Southern area, the fighting is still continuous, the bombardment is still continuous, and people continue to fall dead or injured, and the infrastructure continue to be destroyed because of that ongoing bombardment and ongoing hostilities.
Akram, thank you very much. Our correspondent Akram Al-Sassari in Rafah in Gaza. You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. Celebrations in Dakar as Senegal's opposition candidate takes an early lead in the delayed presidential election.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
I think it should be more global cooperation.
I would like to hear more the voice of the developing countries.
Globalization has lifted more than 1 billion people out of poverty.
The green transition has to happen. It's a necessity.
Well, China and the United States are important powers in the world.
What unites us is much more than what divides us.
And I believe China is committed to this agenda.
Join me, Juliet Mann, to set the agenda at these times every weekend on CGTN.
Welcome back. A reminder of our headlines. 4 men appear in court charged over the attack on a Moscow concert hall that killed at least 137 people. And dozens killed in the latest Israeli airstrikes on Gaza as the UN Security Council prepares to vote on a new resolution calling for an immediate ceasefire. Early results in Senegal's presidential election have put opposition candidate Bassirou Diomaye Faye ahead. The delayed election took place after weeks of protests against attempts by outgoing President Macky Sall to postpone the vote. Provisional results are expected on Wednesday. Our correspondent Nick Mudimba reports.
Senegal's presidential vote went smoothly as early results show Bassirou Diomaye Faye in the lead, with the celebrations breaking out among his supporters. But Faye's main rival from the ruling coalition, Amadou Ba, said a runoff will be needed to determine the winner. At least 12 of the 17 other candidates in the race issued statements congratulating Faye as results trickled in on Sunday. However, former Prime Minister Ba said that celebrations were premature. Now, millions took part in a peaceful day of voting to elect Senegal's president following 3 years of unprecedented political turbulence that sparked violent anti-government protests and broad support from the opposition. State television RTA said that turnout was around 71%. Senegalese are now awaiting the official announcement of the provisional results by the country's Autonomous National Electoral Committee, which will come by Wednesday. Nick Mudimba, CGTN, Dakar, Senegal.
Ecuador's youngest ever mayor and a member of her staff have been shot dead. The bodies of 27-year-old Brigitte Garcia and her communications director were found in a car in the west of the country. It follows the assassination in August of presidential candidate Fernando Villavicencio. The South American country's been under a state of emergency since January after a rise in violence that authorities have blamed on drug trafficking gangs. The DPRK says Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida has requested a meeting with leader Kim Jong-un. Kishida says nothing has been decided yet, but it's important to meet to resolve issues, including the kidnapping of Japanese citizens by DPRK agents decades ago. Pyongyang said there will be no breakthrough if the summit's going to focus on the abduction issue or its nuclear missile tests. Former US President Donald Trump has just hours to prevent the seizure of his assets, including his property empire. He faces a Monday deadline to secure a bond to cover a $464 million penalty in a civil fraud case. If he fails, authorities in New York could freeze his bank accounts or target his properties. The fine was imposed after he was judged to have fraudulently overstated his net worth to secure loans. The cost of living crisis was a major issue for voters in Portugal's recent elections, and housing in particular is a problem, especially for young people, many of whom find themselves locked out of the market. Our correspondent Ken Brown reports.
Meet Patricia Caçapa, a lawyer living in Lisbon who has been evicted 3 times in 8 years because of price hikes from landlords. Now she rents a room in shared accommodation and, like many, worries for the future.
I would say that young people in my age have concerns about to having children, because we don't know if tomorrow we have a house to live, and how can we do this with children? You know, it's really a sad situation.
The housing crisis has brought anger and protest to the streets of Lisbon and beyond. One measure brought in by the previous government was to ban so-called golden visa property purchases. Previously, having assets worth more than $500,000 could guarantee residential status for foreign citizens and valuable visa-free access to Europe's Schengen zone. Now that's been stopped, for property purchases at least. Companies like Henley & Partners, who specialize in migration visas, disagree with the ban.
Let's say that 5,000 people came to live in Portugal via the Golden Visa program in the past 5 years. This represents a tiny percentage of the people looking for houses in Lisbon and in the big cities in Portugal, in Porto and the other big cities. And when you think about it, the kind of property that wealthy entrepreneurs and Golden Visa applicants typically want are not necessarily the same as the ones that the average Portuguese person wants.
Now, with Portugal's hung parliament, the future direction of government housing policy is anyone's guess. Organisations like Door to Door believe successive governments have failed to provide low-cost accommodation for those most in need.
The central government needs to develop a policy to increase public housing. In Portugal, we have just 2% public housing. The European Union average is around 20%. And there are countries like the Netherlands, for example, where the average is around 30%.
Millionaire migration is nothing new. Cities like Lisbon compete to bring in high net worth individuals and foreign direct investment, while also catering to local needs. It's a fine balancing act that has no easy solution. Ken Brown, CGTN, Lisbon.
And that is The World Today. Thanks for watching. There's more news on CGTN Europe's channel on the Telegram app, or scan the QR code on the screen to get stories and updates sent direct to your phone. We're back with more news at the top of the hour. Coming up next, it's World Insight. For now, from all of the team in London, it's goodbye.
Hello and welcome to the weather forecast. I'm Tierney. Well, over to Europe. There could see quite a lot of rain and snow to develop here for a vast majority of the continent on Tuesday, and snow will mainly favor the northern portion with quite a lot of localized heavy intensity, and some light moderate intensity of rain will take the dominance in weather from the west all the way towards into the east. So please be well prepared and take care as well. And as we head into Wednesday, there could see the return of the clear skies here for the majority of the central portion of Europe. However, light moderate intensity of rain will persist for another couple of days here, particularly for the western portion of Europe. So please take a necessary precaution to stay safe. And in terms of the maximum temperatures forecast over the next couple of days, still rather cold here for many portions up in the north. Most of the high temperatures will be about 5 degrees Celsius below freezing for both Tuesday and Wednesday. However, there could see an uptick in high temperatures here for many across the Balkans as we head into the middle of this week under the influence of the warm moisture. Most of the maximum readings will be in excess of 20 degrees Celsius, so please enjoy the warm weather while it lasts. And about business and travel. And showers for both London and Paris with high temperatures in the lower teens on Wednesday. And here down in Madrid, we'll also see chance of showers in the morning hours with a high 15, and low temperatures will be about 6 degrees Celsius. And that is all from me. Stay tuned for more City Forecast.